Hey there, friends. Welcome to the Having a Mom Moment podcast, where we dive deep into the world of motherhood and beyond. I'm your host, Shannon Warner, and I am excited to embark on this journey with all of you. Here's the deal. This podcast is your ultimate sanctuary, your sacred space to hit pause on the chaos of mom life and reconnect with the amazing woman behind the title of mom. Yep, it's all about those precious mom moments because, let's face it, we all need a little more time for ourselves. Am I right? So what can you expect from our time together? Well, picture this. We'll be soaking up wisdom from fellow moms, sharing their stories and triumphs and how they've tapped into alignment on their own motherhood journeys. It's like a mom-to-mom chat over coffee with a sprinkle of inspiration and a dash of humor thrown in for good measure. We're here to light up your soul, to remind you of your incredible power, and to celebrate the unique spark that makes you, you. Because when we take care of ourselves, we become unstoppable forces for good in the lives of those we love. So join me as we laugh, learn, and rediscover the magic of this crazy ride called motherhood together. Get ready for your weekly dose of connection and encouragement, because around here, we don't just mom. We mom with purpose and power in alignment with our true selves. Stay tuned, my friends. The adventure starts now. Hello, my friends. Welcome to this week's episode of the Having a Mom Moment podcast. I am your host, Shannon Warner, and I am so honored and so excited that you've taken your precious time to join us here today. I know you're busy, so you being here means a whole lot. This episode is so good. If you are an expecting mom, be sure to stick around. If you've already had a baby or two but plan to have another, stick around. If you know or love someone who is expecting, stick around. If you've had a baby in the last 7 years, stick around. There's some really amazing information in here from my guest, who I'll introduce in just a moment, but we're talking all about the fourth trimester and matrescence. You may have heard of both of these terms. You may have heard of neither of these terms, but it's a really important conversation, and it's so important that we continue to talk about it as mothers, even if that portion of our journey is behind us. And before you leave the podcast today, be sure to check the show notes for a link to a free How to Fund Your Unpaid Leave workshop, my free 18-page maternity leave planning guide, and if you want someone to deep dive with you on your maternity leave plan or your plan for re-entry into the workplace after baby's born, or if you've already been back at it for a little bit and it just feels extra hard, this Motherhood Momentum experience is a deep dive for 1 month into all of your needs, and let's create a really aligned and incredible plan that honors your needs first. Our guest this week is Sarah Veitenthal. Sarah is a mother to 4 children and resides on a farm in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. She has a BA in philosophy and an International Montessori Degree in Infant and Toddler Development. She was a Montessori Guide and Consultant for 10 years, running an infant and toddler classroom and parent education forum. Sarah is also a postpartum doula, birth educator, and maternal specialist. After many years of working with parents and children together in a school setting, Sarah decided to create her own family-minded business called Madrona Wellness in order to provide more specialized care for families with infants and young children. She focuses on simplistic parenting, Montessori ideals, natural healing for mothers, and whole body mind development for mothers and their children. She offers a variety of sessions that help families address issues that may arise within the parent-child relationship. There are also sessions available to support any deviations that are found within a child's overall development. Sarah is a budding herbalist and enjoys growing herbs and foraging on her farm. I think you're going to love this conversation. Sarah has such a way and care for not only babies, but mamas and partners and the environment in which we're raising these little families. I know you're going to love this conversation as much as I did. So without further ado, here is Sarah. Welcome to the podcast, Sarah. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm excited.
I'm excited too because of our mutual connection, Mandy Woodard, who I had reached out on my social media several months ago, and I was like, I'm looking for someone to talk about matrescence, and she was like, I know somebody. So that was perfect. So I know we'll get into all of that, but before we do, would you mind sharing a bit about your own motherhood journey?
Sure. This is actually a great way to start the conversation because it's my motherhood journey that has really taken me to where I am now to help other moms. So I have 4 children, and my oldest is 15. She's a girl. And then I have my second, who is 14, also a girl. And then I have a son who is 12, and then a son who is 6 months old. So there's a big gap. I was 22 when I had my first baby. And then when she was 7.5 months old, I got pregnant again.
Hmm.
And then when she was 2 years old, I got pregnant again. So I had 3 kids within 3.5 years.
Wow.
So that was really hard. And I was away from my support system. I was away from my family, about an hour and a half away from everybody, but it was just enough to really feel like I was on my own.
Yes.
And so I definitely went through just the thick of it for probably a good solid 7 years, where I felt completely just overwhelmed and like treading water and barely surviving. And there were a lot of good moments, and I am very proud of kind of, growing up with them. But just upon reflection, I really wish that I had had more of a scaffolding kind of built around us as we're all sort of growing up together. So that really prompted me to start diving into just maternal health and well-being, and just how, we as women and we as moms sort of like grow up with our children, and our identity shifts a lot. So I love being a mom. It is my passion, and I strive to be a good mom. So I'm constantly reading books and learning even today. And my children are very busy, which is wonderful and lovely. And I still feel very overwhelmed sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But there can be a lot of beauty in it and a lot of joy. And I learned that sort of along the way with them. And now that I have teenagers, we are learning even more together.
I can imagine. Yeah, I've got some time. My oldest is 7, but yeah, I know it's coming.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that is a whole new world. It can be just as fun and enjoyable, but I will say there has not been one phase of motherhood that has, quote unquote, like gotten easier, so to speak, as people say, because it just changes and their needs change. But there's still a lot of beauty in these moments too, even the hard ones with teenagers. And I'm here for it. Like, I'm here to learn more and eventually be able to guide women through that phase of motherhood as well.
Yes. Just being curious about the phases of the journey instead of trying to fight it. That's what I remind myself. Like, I believe my children were chosen specifically for me. And what are they here to teach me? What can I learn from this? Even if it's incredibly frustrating.
Yes.
What can we learn? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful way to look at things.
It takes practice, because sometimes in the moment you're like, please just put your shoes on, because we need to have left, like 10 minutes ago. But yeah. So 4 children, I am sure. No, I'm not sure. I will let you speak to it. But did you find that each of your postpartum or 4th trimester that we will talk about was different with each one? Were there similarities? Were you surprised by the differences, if there were any?
Yeah, I think being the first-time mom at 22, there was a lack of information in general, just even regarding pregnancy. There wasn't a lot about, what was going on with the fetus as far as development goes. What to expect with my body after birth, physically, emotionally, hormonally. So that was the biggest shock, becoming that first time mom, especially at 22, because as we know, the human mind isn't finished developing itself until the mid-20s. Yeah. So I really was still trying to figure out what it meant to be an adult. So I would say that was the biggest and toughest transition. Was not really being fully grown myself, and then having to give what little of me kind of was fully developed to a child, because I really wanted to be a good mom. So I feel like that was the biggest shock. So I feel like with her, I definitely went through a pretty strong bout of postpartum depression. That was my biggest struggle was after my first child. And I think a lot of it had to do with not knowing what to expect and not really knowing what was within the confines of normal and what wasn't, when to ask for help, and that it was okay to ask for help. So that definitely sort of propelled my entire journey through motherhood, was that initial sort of postpartum period. And then when she was 7 months old and I was pregnant with my second, I felt like I had not healed. I felt like, because I was still nursing
Oh
and
my
I was
gosh.
still, just not necessarily like tender, but I felt very like raw and vulnerable kind of as a new mom,
Yes.
because that was the first time I was going through everything. And then there was going to be another one. And I was like, oh, this is scary. So I feel like with that pregnancy, I was very, like, I knew what to expect more physically, but I was feeling the overwhelm already before she was even here. So with that postpartum period, I didn't necessarily have like any new or worsening symptoms of postpartum depression, but I felt like it never went away. Like it just kind of lingered and transcended through all of that. So then I had two little ones under the age of 2 and a lot of really kind of tough, I would say, hormonal and emotional struggles. Physically, I was okay. I was okay physically. And socially, it was a huge shift for me because it was definitely a social butterfly, like in college and throughout high school. So being tethered to the home and two little ones with constant needs, I really struggled with that.
It's hard.
Nobody talked about that.
Right.
Nobody talked about the social shift of being able to be free and, hang with your friends whenever you wanted to, and then that completely disappearing out of your life. That
Yeah.
was a shock. And I had a lot of people mad at me. There were friends that were mad at me. I think my siblings were a little mad at me because I changed so much, so drastically. So no one talked about that either. That was really tough. And doctors don't even really know how to explore that topic because it's so different for each woman and what that looks like. And so then by the time my son came around, I felt like I had things a little bit more, I don't know, under control, because I actually did seek counseling, and I had worked through some spiritual and social and philosophical questions that I had about motherhood. I think I was a little angry,
Fair.
that some of this, almost like a form of resent, I feel like, because I felt like nobody had talked to me about this kind of stuff. And it was so much harder than anybody had ever even imagined. It was not even an inkling of what I had imagined.
Right.
And so by the time he came along, I felt like I had taught myself a lot about motherhood. And I was like, all right, I'm going to be ready for this. But boys are very different than girls. And they come out with very different temperaments. And biologically, they have very different needs. In my experience, my boys eat more and they have higher energy right from birth. So that was different. He was very needy and clinging and nursed more than the girls. So even though, all right, I got to control, of this, I know what to expect, those demands were a challenge. And then we had a good, 11-year span. And with the fourth one, I had him at 38. So that's a pretty big difference from 22.
Yeah.
I would say physically was my biggest struggle. So after this birth, I had subinvolution of the uterus, and my uterus had a really hard time contracting back down to size.
Oh.
So physically, my body was very angry with me, and that's because I didn't do any of the necessary steps to like heal my pelvic floor after each pregnancy. Because again, nobody had talked about that, and that was a necessary aspect of the fourth trimester. So I bled heavily for 6 weeks and was at a pretty high risk of, not necessarily like bleeding out per se, but they definitely had me on a watch for 6 weeks postpartum of having a hemorrhage. And so I had that anxiety kind of looming over me. And at that point in time, my 3 older kids were very active and very busy. And if I picked up my physical activity level that day, my bleeding would pick up a lot. And so it was very nerve-wracking. So it was a huge message from the universe just to take it easy and sit and bond. So that really changed my identity as a mom even more, because I almost had to let go of my older three a little bit more and really became tethered again to the newborn. And that was hard. There were points where I just really wanted to like kick and scream and just get out of it. I felt very confined physically in my own body because there were so many limitations. So I didn't struggle with any like postpartum depression like the first two, but it was a different challenge in a different way because I felt like physically my body was betraying me.
Yeah.
So that was a different kind of hard. So they each have their own like little tale, I guess, to what has shaped my identity as a mom. But through each of that, there's been like a deep bond for each of them. And that happened at different times. And I do want moms to know that that's okay. Because I feel like there's so many women who say, love at first sight, and they bonded immediately. But I think what we need to really focus on as a mom is it takes time because you're getting to know that little human. And it's okay if it doesn't happen until they're, 5 or 6 months old and you finally feel like, oh, hello there.
Yes.
I know who you are. So each of those stories was different for my kids too. And I bonded with them in different ways and at different times, I feel like. But now we have a very strong connection.
I'm so glad you said that. And I've always applauded when other women have said similar things on the podcast. Because some people do have that experience, and that's what's glamorized is, the crying and the, oh, this is amazing and da, 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 da. And my sister-in-law gave me such a gift when she had her first, and she told me I didn't like love him immediately. There was like, of course, like you're here now, you're my baby, I'm going to take care of you. But like, it wasn't that immediate. Everyone's crying and it's so magical. Yeah. And oh my gosh, I would do anything for you. And I love you. And you are my life's work, and because when my daughter was born, I was like, hey, you're here. I'm glad you're here. Of course, I'm going to take care of you and mother you, but yeah. So to hear that and go, okay, there's nothing wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with you. And it will click eventually. And I will say from my first to my second, because my first was already almost 5 by the time my second was born, I knew what it would turn into. And I knew how much love I had for my first daughter, that when my second came, I was like, okay, yeah, my heart's just going to expand more for you. And I know how this will feel, even if in this moment, it's not love at first sight. But I think it was closer to that experience because I knew what was ahead of us.
Something for parents to think about is a lot of, a baby's personality is shaped after birth. But they are born with a certain aspect of their personality that's ingrained in their DNA. So when we say, so-and-so acts like great-great-grandpa, there actually is truth behind that because that temperament is what's ingrained in their DNA. So when this baby is born, they have a little personality that we actually really can't do much about. I mean, we self-express in certain ways depending on nurture. But, if you're born with a baby who is very vocal and cries a lot right from the beginning, that can really trigger a lot of different emotions within the mother and father and how we interact with that baby. So even if we read all of the books and we hear all of the stories, that baby is going to be born with their own temperament. And that's really going to shape your journey as their mother.
Yes.
Because they have this part of their personality that we didn't get to really pick. And we just kind of have to learn how to interact with that human being. So that comes, over the course of time, and how to really, see their strengths and how to really exalt those strengths. But that's hard work.
Oh, that is not talked about enough. Once I realized like there was only so much that I could do, like at the end of the day, if they don't want to comply, they're not going to comply. And personally, I'm not big on physical punishment. What people do, as long as it, whatever. I'm not tapping into that argument. Like, I know but I'm like, I'm not going to beat them into submission. So really my options are limited, right? So it's like, we're just going to ride this train and try to keep them safe within these parameters, like bumpers on a bowling alley. And I've got I thought my first was a firecracker, and then my second came along. I was like, no, this is a firecracker, and it's just like, okay. Just parent her in the best way that we can with the tools that we have. And yes. And it's funny too, because my dad passed 18 days before my second daughter was born. But sometimes we call her little Ronnie. My dad's name was Ron, because the things that she does and the things that she's interested in are so similar to my dad. And it's so interesting that, you're pointing out that this is imprinted in their DNA. It's fascinating. And there is a gift in that for me, in seeing those connections and seeing the similarities.
Yeah. And there is a lot of correlation between when a very close loved one passes close to the birth of a baby, and, the transfer of energy and just light and all of those things, and how we can see a lot of those personality traits. It just, the family line is really, truly incredible when it comes to that aspect.
Thank you for saying that. And little side tangent, he knew I was pregnant, but it was like Father's Day. He had come out to visit us. It was still really early in my pregnancy, so I didn't tell him at the time. And he had spent the day with me and my daughter. And so a couple weeks later, once we had done the genetic test and knew we were having another girl, I called him to tell him, because we were living about 3 hours apart at the time. And he said, "Wait a minute. Did you know when I saw you on Father's Day?" And I said, "Yeah, I knew. It was just real early, so I didn't want to say anything yet." He goes, "I knew it." He was very deeply spiritual and had certain gifts that were quite interesting. But he said, "I knew there was somebody else with us, and I could not put my finger on it. I could not put my finger on what it was, but I felt someone else with us that day." And he was like, "That makes perfect sense." So it's so interesting, the connection that I feel like was otherworldly. And I do think that they met on the other side before she came to be. So it's a hard experience, but there's been a lot of gifts in it for me.
I just want to share too, just because it's similar. So just kind of striking a similarity between experiences. When my youngest, who was just born in October, 2 weeks after his birth, we found out that his grandfather had terminal pancreatic cancer. And we lost him when our baby was 6 weeks old. And it's a similar situation to you, because we do see characteristic traits, and there was almost like a passing of the torch. This is the continuation of the family line, and they felt like it was okay to say goodbye. So that made our postpartum period very difficult this past time too, because it was basically a time of mourning and a time of joy. And I know a couple of other women who have similar stories, and how that has also shaped sort of their journey through motherhood during that time period in our life, as we get older and we say goodbye to our parents, how it affects us as a parent, and what it, kind of prompts us to reflect upon. And I think it makes us a more mindful parent sometimes, to really think about some of those correlations. So it's hard, and I'm sorry that you went through that.
Well, you too. It's tough, right? But I remind myself that I was put here for a reason in this timeline with these people, and that my personal belief is that I signed up for it knowing what I was getting myself into. So I just, doesn't mean it doesn't, really stink sometimes, but I have learned so much from the experience. So even though there was a lot of pain, I am grateful for a lot of the pieces, because it has, like you said, impacted my parenting and the way that I'm now interacting and moving through my own world.
Yeah, that's huge.
Okay, can we get into fourth trimester, matrescence, all of the things that maybe you have heard if you're already a mom, maybe you've heard, but you're like, what is it? I wish I knew more about that, or why was no one talking about it when I had my baby?
Yeah, absolutely. So where do you want me to start? You want to jump into matrescence?
Wherever you want to go. Let's go.
Okay. So this was a term that was introduced to me probably about 18 months ago. So I was a Montessori teacher for about 10 years, and through that, I got certified as a child development specialist at the Montessori Institute of San Diego. And I used to lead parent classes, parent sessions, where mom and dad would come in with child and work alongside with them. And that was really beautiful because we got to talk about a lot of parenting topics in practicality. Like as the child was displaying some of those developmental milestones, I could work alongside with the parents and sort of teach them how to support that phase of development. So from those classes and sessions, I started to see a huge need in our community. I live in a very rural town, so there definitely is nothing else like this that exists in this area. But I saw a huge gap of just parental support after bringing home baby. So my classes started when baby was 8 weeks old and ran through up to age 4, just to kind of keep it with a younger sort of age group. And what I was noticing is just this huge desire from parents to feel like they had that community support and somewhere to turn to for questions or meal ideas or routine ideas. So that prompted me to get my doula certificate because I really wanted to work hand in hand with parents right from conception. So I got certified to be a doula, and I focus in pregnancy and the postpartum period because those are my passions, but I also am a part of the birth if the family chooses to do that. And I started hearing about this word matrescence through my doula certification. So there was like a handful of topics that we got to choose from to write one of our papers on, and that was one of the topics. And I was like, oh, I've never heard of this word before, like this is different. And there were different videos that we had to watch pertaining to the topic, and then we had to do some independent study. And matrescence had the least amount of resources and references out of all of the other topics by a lot, meaning there were two. There were two resources for this topic. There was one video, and then there was one scientific article in one journal to read. And that was it. And I was like, oh, okay. So I think the term sort of surfaced in the 60s, and it was sort of when there was like a big feminine women's mother movement. And I think that's when it was coined, and I forget who coined it right now, but there was a female, and she was an anthropologist, and she was looking at how mothers shifted their identity in the postpartum period. So she did some preliminary research on sort of what that means. But it never really went anywhere. And that's why it's only found in like 1 or 2 scientific journals, was because I think she did it for like a thesis in university, and she probably became a mom herself.
Oh my gosh, right?
Or she already was. And then, you put things on the back burner when you're a mom, and it never really went anywhere. And so it didn't start to be talked about again until the 2010s. And that was the video that I watched. And it was a woman giving a TED talk. And basically the premise was that we don't talk about this, and it needs to be explored more. And I was like, okay, this is kind of where I'm going to go. I'm going to do this. So by definition, matrescence means the physical, emotional, hormonal, and social transition to becoming a mother. And those are 4 very important aspects, but I also like to throw in spiritual and philosophical as well, because I feel like even if a person isn't necessarily religious or spiritual themselves, we do a lot of like talking through things as a new mom in our minds. So whether that's prayer or affirmation or begging or sorting through things, self-reflecting, like there is definitely a spiritual aspect of becoming a mom.
Yes.
And we definitely need that support to help us, whether that is deep breaths, meditation, nature, whatever floats your fancy, whatever you're into, there is an aspect to that as well. So when I created my business about 1.5 years ago, I created a matrescence session. So that is actually something that people can book with me. And that is for mothers to come in on their own and to really explore in a deeper way and at a deeper level what motherhood means to them, how their identity has changed, and to really just like delve into these deeper topics of self-doubt or guilt, judgment, all of these things that we go through as a mom. And we just kind of have to muddle through on our own, it seems like.
Yeah.
So I've kind of have made it a personal goal to learn as much about this transition into motherhood as I possibly can. And I'm learning this through women and their stories and what their postpartum period looks like and what all of the years following look like. And I record them. So I write them down. And it's basically just my own little study of, I don't know, what it means to be a mom in this era that we are born in. And it's been incredible, like really fascinating.
It sounds so fascinating. Do you have any insight? I'm always curious about this. From what little I do know about postpartum practices in other parts of the world, do you think it lands differently here in the US because of the way our system lacks postpartum support and a lot of prenatal support too, but largely missing out on the postpartum support? Do you think the experience is different where there is more support in other parts of the world?
Absolutely. So I think the United States ranks as like number one or number two for the worst postpartum care out of all of the developed countries
Yes.
in the entire world.
It's
So
insane.
that's huge. And we have our 6-week postpartum visit to the doctor, our checkup. I went to the doctor, I think 5 times before my 6-week postpartum checkup with this last pregnancy because of what was going on with my uterus. And that included 2 internal sonograms. I never would have made it to my 6-week checkup. And I have a lot of postpartum moms under my like doula care that have had a ton of different issues pop up, whether it's swelling or hypertension, heavier bleeding than, should be expected. And they're hesitant about calling the doctor or going into the doctor because it's been drilled into us that it's unnecessary, that
Yeah.
we don't need to. We don't need that support until 6 weeks. And that model, that standard needs to go away.
Yeah.
We need to have someone in every community whose main profession is that postpartum care. And I think it needs to be done in the home.
Yes.
I think we should be going to, at least in the first couple weeks. For me, bleeding heavily for 6 weeks, I would have preferred to have somebody for 6 weeks. I mean, I think there should be options. But there was very little support, even when I was making my own appointments to go into the doctor's office. I felt like there was a lot of brushing off. Even when I was asking the questions, there wasn't even a lot of depth to the answers that were given to me. So again, I learned a lot of this on my own. None of my friends had ever had sub-involution of the uterus, none of them. So I didn't even have a friend that I could talk to about this. And it was scary. And I think that I probably went through that to be able to help, share and know how to handle it if I have a mom who goes through it. But I think, as far as other countries go, we don't even talk about the diet that mothers should be, introducing to their lifestyle after birth. So I do recommend a book called The First 40 Days to all new moms in their postpartum period. And it is Eastern medicine. The woman who wrote it is from China, and she practices Chinese medicine from her grandmother, really. And it's a lot of how to use foods and herbs and warmth in your first 40 days after birth to create this cocoon around mom. And so that correlates with the idea of matrescence because it's feeding you what you need as you're going through metamorphosis to become a healthy and strong mother. And so when we don't do these things and we're depleting our body and we're depleting our energy even more after birth instead of sort of filling it up with all of this goodness, it actually makes us a more tired, a more resentful, a more depleted mother in and of itself. So a lot of countries do focus on maternal health after the birth of the baby, whether that's through food, whether the mother-in-law comes to stay if she's, able to, or the mother or extended family. Doulas are, widely used in some other countries to help with older children or basic errands. I read not too long ago that there is a town in Germany that, or a couple towns in Germany that actually just set up kind of a new system where if baby's colicky or has a lot of emotional woes and mother is burnt out and kind of at the end of her rope, that a woman comes in just to rock baby. Just to have that support of alleviating some of, the constant screaming. And that definitely does not exist in our country. I looked it up. It doesn't exist. So if you have a colicky baby who is screaming and you don't have the help, I mean, they're basically on their own. And that is just unbelievable to me.
Yeah. There's so many layers to it. I remember having a day where, and my mom, the reason I thought to call her was because I remember her saying a very similar story about me, where there was one day as a baby, I just would not stop crying. And she took me to her mother's because she was like, I need a minute. And I was having that same kind of day, and my husband and I both. And it was, I think it must have been over the weekend. I don't know how little she was, but she was little, and she just screamed the entire day. And it doesn't matter how good you're doing. That will eventually break you, right?
Yeah.
And then you add the layer of the lack of care and already feeling depleted and run down and not sleeping. And thank God I did. I was like, I just need you to come over here and hold her for a few minutes, please, because we're about to break, both of us.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine if I had no one to call.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are women who just don't have support. I talk to a lot of military wives or women who don't have extended family or relationships with their parents or in-laws. And they really absolutely do not have the support, and it doesn't exist in our community. And they really don't have any place to turn, because if they go to the OBGYN, that is not their specialty.
Right.
What they are there for is basically, yes, the mental well-being, but mostly the physical well-being. So if you present with some sort of emotional or hormonal imbalance or deviation, they're going to jump to the pharmaceuticals. And I can't tell you how many times I was offered antidepressants in my last pregnancy just because I was vocalizing emotional sort of deviations I was having. Like, oh, this is kind of a different feeling. Or, this is a struggle, because I really actually did it purposeful. I wanted to see what their response was. And every time, 100% of the time, they offered me a pharmaceutical, which is fine. I mean, sometimes, we need that to get back on track. But I really wanted to see where the support was, if there was a book they were going to recommend, or a podcast, or deep breathing exercises, or changing my diet. And it was brushed off every time. And it was, we can prescribe you this antidepressant if you're feeling that way. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. Oh, and sometimes it is needed. Sometimes we're not saying, but it's not always the be all end all, It's like slapping a Band-Aid.
Right. And having something that correlated with that, like, we can do this, but we also have this class you can take, or, this article you can read that kind of explains things on a deeper level. But again, nothing was explained to me in a way that sent me the message, we care about you, and we care about what you're going through. And these are the things that are going to make your experience better. So that, I did feel let down, because I was hopeful. I was like, here I am pregnant in 2024 and 2023, I guess it was. I bet there's going to be different networks and different things put into place that are going to help me kind of work my way through some of these emotional challenges. Nothing.
It's wild to me.
Yeah.
It's wild. I heard about Matrescence back in, it would have been 2017 when my first daughter was several months old. And there's not that much more out there than there was at the time. Like, I think there are more women with platforms talking about it.
Yeah.
Well, and then your algorithm will feed you things if that's what you're looking for, and that's what you're used to looking at. So I know that I'm seeing more for that reason, but it's like, we're still just at the very tip of the iceberg here. And another thing that was so frustrating for me, and it took me 2 births to realize this, was I knew what a doula was, but not until late in my first pregnancy. I always thought like, oh, these are the women who want the quote, airy fairy hippie births, you know?
Yeah.
That was my perception. And I was like, I don't even know where you find one or whatever. And I ended up taking a birthing class because my friend was pregnant at the same time as me, which was a huge gift. Interesting though, we even now looking back have realized we were struggling and not telling each other. So that's not even a guarantee if you've got somebody walking the journey at the same time as you that you're going to have that truthful connection there, even though we were both trustworthy factors in that experience. Anyway, she wanted to take this birthing class and I was like, okay, lady, like I'm more of like a 1 hour webinar kind of girl. And she was like, it's 6 weeks and we go meet at the office and it's a group class and you're partnered. And I'm like, okay. But even then, even though a doula was leading the course, I still didn't understand what they did. You know, I did not understand. And I think the point being that even as more care becomes available, we're still not fully educated on where to find it, what it involves, and that it's not just somebody coaching you through labor and delivery. Like it is so much broader than that. And where to find it and how much does it cost and is your insurance covering it, which I know that's becoming more readily available too. But it's like we just don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. And then trying to move forward in an informed way and trying to build support when it's like I feel like as soon as you get pregnant, like a little thing should fall from the sky where it's like, hey, you're gonna have a baby. Here's 45 resources. Here's some phone numbers, you know, but there's none of that. You have to seek it yourself.
Yeah.
And if you don't know it exists, how can you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I told you a little bit ago that I live in a rural community. And so when I started talking to friends and family about what I wanted to do and sort of like break away from the school where I was teaching and start kind of jumping into more of this parental guidance and doula work, I had a lot of people tell me I was going to fail, that it was not going to work in this area because it sounded like something from the cities. And I just smiled and said, okay, but all women deserve to have the support and the care, no matter where they live or where they're from, or even if they've ever heard of it. But I have a lot of people in my community, when I tell them what I do, just blank stare. They have no idea what I'm talking about, even though, like, if I'm talking to a woman and she has children, she went through it. When I talk about some of these ideas, she has no idea that her mind, body, and soul has gone through what I am talking about. And they feel like a fish out of water because there isn't any like connection to these ideas and what they're experiencing. So as far as like finding a doula, there is a doula registry online that you can use. But again, if you don't know it's there and you don't know it exists, like that can be hard. But my biggest friend has been word of mouth, and I've noticed that has picked up because the more that moms share, like even like you were saying, with your friend, we're not always completely transparent, but as much as we can be to share our stories with one another, the more I have people talking and like, you know, even through social media and other platforms, the more that it's getting out there. So I'm a huge advocate, like even at my kids' sporting events or, you know, if I go to a school event, I talk to other parents. So I think if women have the capacity to be able to just share what little bit they even do know, that's monumental. And as far as what a doula does, I think one of the biggest ways to kind of explain that is what a doula doesn't do, because a doula does pretty much everything. So if you were to have that pod that were to drop down and kind of have all of these resources, you could probably just have, you know, like a couple things and doula.
Yeah.
Because they will help you find all of the other things. They are an advocate for the parents. So we don't give medical advice as far as like, you know, what you should do physically, or if something, you know, major emotionally is happening, we're always going to say you need to talk to a doctor. Because we just don't have that PhD aspect. But as far as like going into the birthing room or postpartum care, there's a huge advocacy for the parents. So what that means is, you know, teaching them what's going on with the newborn. That can be feeding, sleeping, playtime. It can also just be supporting other older siblings, reading a book. Some doulas will do light housework or cooking. We were talking earlier about like the different meals and foods that mothers need. So with my services, I might provide a bone broth or some healing herbal teas. And then I will create like a little recipe book for mom before birth, so she can start preparing foods and store them in the freezer. So it's like nourishing to the body. I also do 2 postpartum well checks if I do a birth, and that is in the first week after birth. So I'm going to be looking for swelling. I'm going to be listening to what the language mom is using to pick up on any like baby blues or something more severe that's going on. So my main goal is mom. And so we have the pediatrician for the babies. And we have, other support that's going into place after the birth of a child for the child itself. But for mom, that doesn't really exist. So my role at that point in time as a doula is for the mother and to make sure that she is doing the best she possibly can in that scenario. But because I'm an infant and toddler development specialist too, I take things a little bit differently than a lot of doulas. So we're going to be talking about what baby's doing as well.
That's so helpful. Even just to have someone to bounce that, like, this is happening either with my body, which, hey, like, I'm breastfeeding and this is really painful, and just someone else to talk to that's maybe not your mom, or, like maybe they're not the person, your safe space, but the added piece of, hey, this is what this baby is doing, and it's my first baby, and I have no idea what's going on. Is this okay? Because for me, I was like, I'm going to kill her. Like, I'm going to accidentally kill her with everything that I do. That's what I thought, And
that's a real fear. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, and postpartum anxieties can present themselves in so many different ways. Like some moms have that fear. Other moms might have more like self-harm fears, like they will deflect and turn inward and have very, negative thoughts, or even just about feeding issues. If breastfeeding isn't working out, what are the best formulas that are available? Sleep isn't working out. And people are scared to jump into co-sleeping, or they're scared to let the baby sleep on their own. Like there's so many different personal and cultural choices that you can't necessarily hand a mom a book and say, here, read this.
Right.
Because that information isn't always applied through the lens of your own family's culture and what works for you all. So I think the biggest thing for me is to get to know that family and get to know those parents and their ideologies and what goals they have, and then to help support them to attain those goals and ideologies. But to also let them know sometimes it's okay to let go of what we had previously planned and to offer a different perspective from outside of what they already know. So that is really enjoyable, because I feel like parents, especially dads don't have enough support either. And I've talked to a couple of dads recently who have said things along the lines like, I feel like I'm going through postpartum depression, but I'm a man.
Wow.
And if you want to talk about matrescence not being something that's, widely accessible, postpartum depression in dads, that hasn't even been on the forefront yet. Like we haven't even, the iceberg isn't even like poking out of the water.
Right. Wow. I'd never considered that, but it makes sense. I mean, they are going through a transition, even if their body did not create and birth this baby.
Yeah. But there's different hormones, I think, that are happening in their brains as well, whether that's, the oxytocin when they cuddle and do, skin to skin with their infant, or, maybe the cortisol is up there and they have a ton of stress, and how are they managing that? So I do think that there are hormonal and physical changes that are happening with dad, and we don't even know the extent of them, and how the newborn baby, in their world and in their life is prompting some of those hormonal shifts. I don't think, we have dived into this at all.
No. And I can't, I mean, I think now we have a culture of men who would be more willing to talk about it, but I feel like in my parents' era, that would be much harder to come by. Men talking about how they're, no. Plus, dads are more involved now, too, largely, which is amazing. And then how that plays into all of it as well. Fascinating.
So I mean, I include dad in this stuff now, like all of the things that we're talking about and how to support mom. But and I feel like that's where a lot of doulas hit that angle before was including dads on how to support mom. But now I almost want to like create a divide, and how do we support dad as well?
Yeah.
It could be or partner. It
Yeah.
could be, partner of baby. It could be a grandparent, but partner. Because that person is a very pivotal point in the baby's life as well. And so we need that person to be mentally, physically, emotionally healthy to be able to provide the best version of themselves to the entire family unit, whatever that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And if dad or partner or grandparent, whoever isn't healthy and they don't feel supported, it's just going to add to the already vulnerable and fragile time period that mom and baby are going through.
Yes.
So yeah, we need more attention and focus on that aspect too.
Wow. Fragile is such a good way to describe it that I have
Yeah,
never heard before, but it is so accurate. Like,
absolutely.
like a breakable, like Christmas bulb, like the old glass ones, we're like, it's okay as long as somebody touches it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know.
Oh my
Beautiful.
gosh.
And that's a good analogy because I mean, we really do need to hold mother and baby
Mm,
in this little like cocoon, this little nest, and they are fragile. And that is what a lot of other countries talk about. They do recognize just sort of that raw vulnerability of mother and child in those first weeks. And here it's like you have your 6 week, maternity leave, and a lot of moms are expected just to jump right back into the workforce, like,
yeah.
just a snap of the fingers, get right back in there, and it's an easy thing. And they haven't even completed, that fourth trimester at that point in time.
Yes. Yes. Please talk more about fourth trimester. With my first, I did 6 weeks because financially, at the time, I thought that's all we could swing. Looking back, we could have figured it out. The second time, I got smarter and I took the 12 weeks that I had
Yeah.
available to me, although 6 was unpaid. But just the extra amount of healing I was able to do in that extra 6 weeks, like I was a completely different person when I returned to work the second time after the additional time. It makes such a difference. So, what is the fourth trimester? How long is it? What's happening?
So trimester is basically a word that means a 3-month time period. Um, so the fourth trimester really does just kind of piggyback right off of the third trimester, and then birth happens, and the fourth trimester begins with the birth of the child. And that's typically the first 12 weeks of life after baby is here. And it is also the amount of time that is needed for the hormones that are related to pregnancy to come out of our body. So one of the hormones that sticks around the longest is relaxin, and that is what helps our joints be able to become a little bit more limber and open up for birth process, but like also in our feet, because we do gain extra weight during pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
So during that fourth trimester, all of our joints are kind of going back to place. And so that is the time period that is needed. So that's kind of what it correlates with. The fourth trimester also is referred to the symbiotic period. And that is the moment of time that is most pivotal. It is the most important time period in human development. It's the first 8 weeks of our life. The rest of our life basically is built upon that foundation. So it is our first experience of relationship with others because you will have a caregiver. You're dependent on a caregiver. And you develop 2 psychological legs. One is trust in the world. So that is a message to the baby that they are safe, that they're not going to be eaten by a Tyrannosaurus Rex or something like that, so they're getting to know the world and that it is a safe place. And then at the tail end of 8 weeks, they are going to start developing the second psychological leg, which is I trust myself. And that lasts for the first 3 or 4 years of life. And that's the idea that baby exists kind of in its own plane and its own space and time. And so the mother's role during that time is to bond with her baby. In the fourth trimester, your job is to allow your body to heal from pregnancy, to refuel, to give it what it needs, to have a healthy healing period, and to bond with your baby.
Mm-hmm.
That is it. Those are the 2 focuses of the fourth trimester. And we have a lot of moms, whether it's, for financial reasons, personal reasons, maybe her job requires it, going back into the workforce during that period. And your body has not fully healed. And that bonding period is so important that I really want people in our country to recognize that you said, like, maybe upon reflection, you could have made it work. To really realize the importance of that aspect of our child's development. And if we could just, put it in some bubble wrap almost, like, okay, we're going to keep you safe and we're going to preserve this relationship because it's really going to affect our children for the rest of their life. And that is another place for countries like very differently, drastically from the United States, is they really protect that fourth trimester as a time for mother and baby to get to know one another and for mom to really heal. So that is kind of what I do as a doula too, is really step into that time period and support the parents to understanding that it's just as important as any period during pregnancy.
I'm glad it's called a trimester because I think it does nod to the importance of it in the development of both the baby and the mother to go along with, pregnancy. Two things, shameless free plug. I do have a free 1-hour workshop on how to help fund your unpaid leave because it makes me emotional. I don't want anyone else to have to decide, based out of financial fear to not take the extra time, and it pisses me off. So I get emotional. I cry when I'm angry. So it's totally free. It's just some ideas to help drum up some extra funds or to clear some space in your budget so you can do it. And two, unfortunately, with the way things are, there will be women who do still have to go back to work. So how or what tips can you provide to women who are like, shit, this is just my life and I have to go back. So how do I best navigate when I can't be home full time for the last 4 or 6 weeks of this fourth trimester?
Yeah, and that is a very real thing in our country. A lot of families have to have both parents work now just to be able to put food on the table. And I don't ever want a mother to feel guilty for that because I was there and I totally had to go back to work after it was pretty much after both of my girls. I had to go back pretty early because we were young. And it was a necessity. And I know a lot of moms, their hands are tied. So I don't want to say, they should do this or they should do that. They should look for this type of daycare or whatever. You're going to do the best you can with that aspect of finding care for your child. The biggest thing that we can do during that time is to be the healthiest versions of ourselves. So the person that we are, what's left of us after our workday, the person that we give to our children is the best version of ourselves. So, quality over quantity, definitely. Yeah. So still honoring and still being mindful of the fact that your body is healing and that you are allowed to give yourself some grace and that you are allowed to rest. Try to prioritize the tasks around the home that need to get done. Let go of some of those expectations of having the perfect home or, the picture perfect Instagram clothes and all of those things. And really just like feed yourself with nutrient dense food and drinking water, taking deep breaths, and really just being the healthiest version of yourself that you can be, getting as much sleep as possible. Because I think that if we honor ourselves, even if it's challenging and tough, we are going to give the best version of ourselves to our children. And that doesn't have to be anything major. You don't have to go on vacations or to the park, or you don't have to do anything. Like, they just want us.
Right.
So cuddling is okay. Reading a book is okay. Listening to music is okay. I'm a huge proponent of not a lot of technology for young ones. So I think the more that moms can be disconnected after work in the evening hours with their children. I mean, even if you need to zone out every now and again, that is real life.
Yeah.
But in the same point in time, like if you can just make the time that you do have with your little one meaningful, and taking opportunities to bond, I love reading books. I think that is a wonderful way for mothers to have a relaxing evening and to bond with their little ones is reading
Hmm.
books. Because I have a lot of moms who say, like, I don't necessarily like playing, with my kid, and that's
Yeah.
okay. And at 6 weeks old, they're still learning how to bat at things and grasp things. And sometimes that can become monotonous. So I think snuggling is a perfect way just to kind of like
Yeah.
enjoy your little one and bond without putting too much pressure on yourself.
Yeah. Oh, those little baby snuggles.
Yeah.
I do miss
Yeah.
those. When they just curl up on you, it's like, this is the best. And, they're asleep or whatever, looking over your shoulder. If you need to scroll on your phone for your sanity, like, that's
Absolutely.
okay too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
curious your thoughts on this. My husband, the first time around, he also got 6 weeks of paid leave, which is huge. I know it's becoming more available, but it's still not common. So we took the first 2 weeks together, and then he went back to work for 4 weeks, which he said was very hard because he was sleep deprived and he was very involved in sharing night duty. And then when I went back at 6 weeks, he stayed home for 4 weeks. So it extended the time that our daughter was able to be home and not put into daycare. And I'm pro daycare. Like, I got no issues with a certified, healthy daycare situation. But just to prolong that time and give her more time with us, because then when I was able to run home on lunch and spend time with her then. And what are your thoughts? Is that a good angle if you can swing that? Is it good for dad, since we're starting to talk about their postpartum experience? What do you think?
Yeah, I love that. I think that that is such a gift. And if parents are able to kind of tag team, even if, dad doesn't necessarily have like paternity leave, I think having an open conversation with your partner about baby's care is super important. Because if you are able to keep your little one in the home and have the opportunity to have a caregiver come in or to balance things with your partner, it allows for sort of a more gentle introduction to the world for baby. Because your home in and of itself is a community. There's going to be smells. You're going to cook food a certain way. There's going to be sights and sounds. Dad's going to do things differently than mom. So it is, a little community. And it is baby's first introduction to the world is the going ons of the home. So I think if you can try to create some balance between mom and dad or partner, then it just allows for a more gentle introduction for baby to really understand the world that they're living in. So that way, when you guys do need to get to an option of daycare or a different caregiver outside of the home, the baby has a more secure attachment because they understand, like, this is where I'm from. And they know their home and when they go back to it. So they have more of an understanding of their own little day-to-day schedule.
Mm.
And we need to give babies more credit sometimes because they are resilient and they do adapt. And they have, I think, like 86 billion neurons that they are born with primed for learning. So we can take advantage of that and create little routines in their day that kind of reiterates, yes, mommy is going to work, but we're going to have this nice sort of routine. And that helps baby understand and feel safe and secure within those parameters if mom or dad has to go back to work.
Mm-hmm.
So I do talk about that with parents, kind of introducing little points throughout our day that are similar because children thrive within that little routine. And I know with newborns, a lot of people are like, yeah, we're just going to, do everything on demand and take their lead, which is great. But I still think that there are opportunities, just like, the sun rises and the sun sets, there are cycles.
Yeah.
And we can introduce things in the baby's daily kind of routine that sort of set that, I don't know, just that rhythm. And that
Mm-hmm.
helps them feel a little bit safer and they know what to expect. And that way, when you guys are ready to jump back into work and you have some of that routine already implemented, the child is going to feel more comfortable in a new environment. So I think that's a really important conversation for parents to have before baby is here, but then recognize it could absolutely change once baby's here.
Right.
Keep the conversation going, keep it open.
So good. I love how you said rhythm too, because
Yeah.
I know routine can be some people are like, yes, routine, and other people are like, no,
Yeah,
thank you. But a rhythm
exactly. A
beautifully ties
rhythm.
that together.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Because
so
I have
good.
families who are both. Like I have a lot of families who homeschool and they don't necessarily need to be tied down to a lot of the same routines as families who have children going to school or daycare outside of the home.
Right.
So I find using a word like rhythm really kind of sets the tone, and it really does correlate with nature. I mean, we have seasons, the sun, like we said, rises and sets. So there are a lot of different stimulants outside of our own existence that are affecting that rhythm.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to create some good, smooth kind of pieces throughout our day to tie everything together.
Yeah. Oh, and it's easy enough to do too, but you're doing and laying such good groundwork for your little one. I love
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
So good. So good. I feel like I could talk to you all day. First, you are so gentle and you say important things in such a loving, non-judgmental way. It's
Oh, it's my true.
beautiful. I can only imagine the magic that you're bringing to your community, and clearly it's so needed. And I hope the knowledge of what doulas do and what you offer your community continues to expand, because like you said, I know people look at you like, you do what now?
Yeah,
What?
I know.
And I think the name doula is so foreign feeling that it can throw people to. Do you know the origin of the name doula?
So I did learn about it in training, and it was something it has to do with a birth worker, and caring for the mother, but I forget the origin right now.
Okay.
It's of European origin. It
Okay.
definitely derived from a European country.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that is part of the case because a lot of people have never even heard of the word itself. And like I said, the definition itself, like if you were to look it up, it's so broad because it basically just has to do with doing whatever the mother needs support in. So there are many different definitions actually. And that's why there's just a joke. It's more of like, what doesn't a doula do?
Mm.
It's a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a woman on the podcast back in the fall, and she was specifically a postpartum doula. So the point is, if you don't find somebody in pregnancy, it's not too late. There's probably still someone, and I know availability is limited and they do get booked in advance, but there is still an opportunity for extra help, even if you get baby home and then realize, oh,
Oh,
this is a lot.
absolutely. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
even in toddlerhood, I've had moms reach out in toddlerhood. And they'll say, I think I have some postpartum depression. And they've been in a funk for
Mm.
maybe 18 months. And sometimes they think this is just how it is. This is motherhood, like I'm supposed to be giving all of myself to someone else. And, the baby starts to, toddle away and explore the world a little bit more. And it does give mom a little bit of time to self-reflect and they realize like, oh, maybe this isn't normal. Maybe I have gone down into a little bit of a darker hole than I thought. And I might need some help. So yeah, I had a mom a couple of months reach out to me who had a 2 and a 4-year-old. And she was starting to actually really vocalize that perhaps, she wasn't the best version of herself and she wanted to be able and she actually stays home with her kids and does, like a little homeschool with them. And didn't go back to the workforce, but she still wasn't giving that quality time to her kids because she was so burnt out. So we're just making little shifts in the home and little changes just so she can be a better version of herself for her kids. And it's never too late. I mean, that's what our kids want. Our kids want connection and they want the best versions of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for saying that it goes beyond, because I think there is a perception that it is something that comes in like the first 6 to 12 weeks. So if you're not marking I remember very vividly the form and like checking the boxes. Do I feel
Yeah.
this? Do I feel that at my 6th week? And even then I was like, oh, I don't want them to, and I was feeling okay, but I was like, I should answer this strategically
Yes.
because I don't want anyone to raise a flag, right? But
Right.
I didn't experience the depths of it until after my daughter turned a year old. And then at that time, I was like, this isn't postpartum depression. Like, she's a year old. This has got to be something else.
No. And there are different studies that kind of say different things, but basically one of sort of the mindsets that I follow is that our cells regenerate every 7 years. And so
Mm,
there is a lot of evidence that points to the fact that postpartum depression can present itself anywhere in the first 7 years after birth, because those cells are still retaining memory of the birthing experience,
yeah.
and a pregnancy itself. And so the birth experience is actually a trauma, which we don't really talk about, but it is a very traumatic experience. Whether you have, quote unquote, an actual trauma or something fearful that's happened, we're going through something that's so great and it's such a big time to change and transition that it is defined as a trauma. And so the cells are actually kind of retaining, remembering that trauma. And so there are triggers in our everyday life experience that can kind of wake up those cells. And we can kind of jump back into that mentality of our fight or flight. With trauma, it's about survival.
Right.
So at any point in time in the first 7 years of life, something can be expressed that has to do with postpartum depression, because our mind and our body and our hormones are sort of hanging on to all of these little mini traumas that are associated with birth in those early years of raising a child. So it is really important to continue to talk to mom, even after, the toddler years, the preschool years, those early elementary years are tough.
Yeah. And you figure if you're adding to your family, like you're
Yes.
just extending that season. I'm so glad you said that, especially like down to the cellular level. Like your cells remember, and those memories can be awakened. So thank you for
Yes.
saying that. And I think it just normalizes, like, yeah, you might feel yucky, like, and that's normal. And it falls in this under this umbrella of postpartum depression. And that's okay too. I think we need to quit making the word sound so scary. I was actually talking to my husband before I came down here because he was talking about his own fears. And he said, I have to be honest, I was fearful that something was going to happen to you in
Mm,
delivery, And he said, and then he goes, I knew the risk wasn't high, although it's higher than it should be, right? He goes, I knew the risk wasn't high. He goes, but then I was even more fearful that you were going to fall into postpartum and what that was going to look like and how I was going to navigate it. And I did not tell him until in the last couple of years, hey, I really wasn't good. You didn't do anything wrong. And I managed to work my way
yeah.
through it. But, it's like, even if you have a supportive partner, like they aren't always aware of the signs, or you're masking and not showing them the signs, and not to go down, this other full
Absolutely.
road. But
Yeah.
it's like, it is a serious topic, but it doesn't have to be scary. And the more we talk about it and the more we bring it to light, I think the
Hmm.
more we and our partners, whoever they may be, can help us navigate through that space if we're in it, or if we're kind of hanging our toes over the edge, looking down into the deep ocean of postpartum.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say, that you kind of reflected and then you realized that maybe you were in not such of a great place. I think that's a lot of women's stories, is that they don't even know sort of the place that they're in isn't necessarily the place that they have to be. Because I was in that same kind of boat that you were in, like, okay, maybe things aren't so great, or maybe this is how it's supposed to be. Maybe this is just what it's like adding another child to the family. And we just don't really know. And so there's a lot of like self-doubt, and then our partners might not even pick up on some of those signs because they think, well, maybe this is just what it's like now. Maybe this is our new normal. And that's a really nice aspect of doula work, is picking. That's why I really listen to what moms have to say, because sleep deprivation is huge. And a lot of times, we're not getting all of those macro and micronutrients that we need because we're eating like cold macaroni and cheese out of the pan or something
Yeah.
like that. So I really try to listen to what their day to day is like. And then it's like, oh, here's the gap. And seeing if we can kind of fill in some of those holes. And that kind of just makes like a better overall experience. Um, and it's just really, it takes listening and observation and a skilled set of eyes sometimes to pick up on those tiny little clues that maybe we're not exactly where we could be
Yeah.
emotionally and hormonally.
Right. And especially if it's your first, how do you know? You just don't
Exactly.
know. You just don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Mm,
And we just think, oh, maybe this is it.
yeah. I've had a lot of women on this podcast who are like, oh, yeah, looking back in hindsight, I definitely had it and just did
Hmm.
not know at the time because they didn't know
Yeah,
what they didn't know. Mm,
exactly.
keep
Yeah,
sharing your stories, keep bringing it to light, right? Mm,
absolutely.
hmm If you could give one piece of advice to a mom at any stage in the motherhood journey, what would it be?
I think like, as far as advice goes, is probably building a community. I think that is one of the most valuable aspects because I will say isolation or even like using, Google and internet tools and things like that can lead you down darker places. So real in life, in person community, I think is probably one of the biggest gifts that a new mom can have. And so whether that's getting a doula to come into your home, whether that's a family community, whether that is finding a little mommy and me play group, or going to a mommy and me yoga class, having a support system is a game changer, a lifesaver. And I think that that looks different for each woman. Even if you're an introvert and you don't want a big group of people around you, you could even do a Zoom call with a doula. But having that community feel completely around you and your child and your family is so important and so valuable. We are social creatures. Humans are social creatures. We have a group mentality. Motherhood is not meant to be done alone. And so when we think about it takes a village, it's kind of an old, saying, but it really does. And we need other positive influences in our lives and in our children's lives to create a more well-rounded existence. So community, I guess.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that. It's fantastic advice and things that I wish people were thinking about in their pregnancy, right?
Oh,
Of course,
yes.
you don't,
Yeah.
again, you don't know what you don't know, and it's a ride that you can't predict, right? So it's hard to convey to expecting women like, hey, maybe we should put these things into place, and just,
Yeah. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Mommy and me groups are a gift. If you can find a good mommy and me group that has a teacher or a leader that is knowledgeable kind of in a parenting realm, and that can be, in many different settings. They can be in a home setting, somebody can host. You can find one in a community center or in a church-based place. But mommy and me groups are huge because that is the opportunity for you to talk about a lot of the things that you're going through together with that practicality of the children kind of working alongside one another. So it really kind of puts it all into this real life perspective. And you know what? We're going to get embarrassed sometimes because our kids are going to throw a fit, or we're going to cry because we're working through something hard. So I think that that is a really valuable tool. So if you have mommy and me groups in your community, see if one is a right fit for you. If not, maybe some women would feel brave enough to start one because it's, I think, a major aspect to a mother's well-being.
Totally. I totally agree with you. I had a woman on named Michelle Keating, and she's in New Zealand. I think she's in New Zealand, not Australia. Anyway, she was talking about her postpartum experience, and there you are just assigned to a mommy and me group that the government funds and puts on, and they're like, hey,
Wow.
you meet at this place on this day at this time, and I'm not exactly sure how long, but it's just part of your experience. I
Wow. So
know.
that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
That in and of itself. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's not, a right fit for some women, or that might seem a little bit too extreme for some women, but it's an option.
Yeah. And I can imagine some people being like, I don't want to do that, but the value once you get in
And
it.
oh, yes.
Yeah, totally, totally. Oh, okay. Busy mom, 4 kids, doula, all the things. How do you reconnect to yourself in motherhood?
I try to honor my hobbies. Like my hobbies that have always been a part of me. Like I love to read. I love to go hiking. I love like looking at the stars. I love just being outside. So sometimes like if I feel myself getting a little burnt out or a little overstimulated or a little overwhelmed, it's usually because I haven't honored like something that I like to do. I love to cook. So fortunately, that's a huge aspect that provides something for my family, but I'm also feeling peace doing that. So I think that's important too for moms to do what they love and to be able to include their family in some way. But I love my work. So it does fulfill me. But I think getting alone time is really important. And moms definitely don't get enough of it because we usually transition from a work environment with other human beings to going home with other human beings. And that's why we feel so overtouched and overstimulating. So I think if you have the opportunity to have alone time in your day, find it. And whatever that looks like for you.
I'm an only child, so I'm a huge fan of alone time.
Yes,
So
yes.
yeah, shout out to my other only children out there because I know you feel it, like you're used to
Yeah,
being alone and then you get married and there's somebody always
totally
living in your
people.
house and then there's a kid and then there's another kid. You're like, I need 1 hour,
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I feel that. I totally feel. And I would say 1 hour when your children are not sleeping because you feel like you're alone, but you're not because they can wake up at any time and totally throw that.
Absolutely. And usually, like, in the evening, our day is done and we're already feeling exhausted and kind of overwhelmed and burnt out ourselves. So if that's the only time you can get it, great. You're gonna get something from that. But if you can have real good quality alone time with yourself, that's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Big fan. Big fan. It doesn't even have to be a lot of time. Just a little bit of alone time for me is
Yeah.
like such a soul
Yeah.
recharge. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
This has been amazing. You are such a wealth of knowledge. So please, can you tell everybody where we can find you, where they can work with you in whatever capacity? And then we'll make sure all of your links are in the show notes as well.
Yeah. So the name of my business is called Madrona Wellness. Madrona is a Celtic word meaning mother goddess.
Oh,
So I
I
really want
love
women.
that.
Yes. I really want women to be able to step into their identity, feeling like a goddess as a mother.
Mm.
So it's also a Spanish word for midwife. So that is a kind of another correlation. But the website is Madrona, Madrona -wellness.com. You can find me on Facebook with the handle Madrona Well. And then on Instagram, it's Madrona Wellness, all one word. And I do post a lot of sort of parenting tips and techniques. I post a lot of different activities you can be doing with your kids, some recipes, things that we're kind of up to in my office space if I have a group session with other kiddos, things like that. So you can book a session in person if you're local, but I also do telehealth through Zoom. And that's for moms in the postpartum or in the prenatal period as well, kind of like organizing their thoughts and getting everything into place. So I communicate virtually or in person, whatever the need of the family is.
And the general region that you're in case someone happens to be listening from your general area.
Yeah, so I am in Northern Virginia. And I do sometimes get people close to the West Virginia or Maryland, DC kind of line. So whoever is kind of in that northern area, I've traveled to their home as well.
All of those links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here. This was so informative. Even for someone who has some of this knowledge, this was a lot of information, a lot of good information, and a lot of really lovely tips and kindness that you offer to women anywhere on that journey. So thank you so much for being here, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a lovely conversation.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Having a Mom Moment podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and for sharing this space with us today. Before you go, don't forget to check out the show notes for any links or resources mentioned in today's episode. And hey, while you're at it, why not give me a follow on Instagram and Facebook at Having a Mom Moment. You can also visit havingamaMoment.com for even more mom-inspired resources. If you've enjoyed today's conversation as much as I have, please be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on future episodes. And it would mean so much if you leave us a glowing 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, remember to embrace those mom moments, find alignment in your journey, and always honor the incredible woman you are. Take care, friends, and we'll see you on the next episode.